Most of us start gardening exactly the same way. We clear a patch of dirt, space out a few vulnerable seedlings in perfect isolated rows. When plants are left completely exposed like this, they become easy targets. Aphids move in, growth stalls out, and pretty soon you are spending your weekends buying bottles of chemical pesticides just to keep your harvest alive. But nature rarely grows in sterile rows. Wild plants survive through biological partnerships. Gardeners call this companion planting, and it acts as a biological force multiplier. Look at the difference here. On the left, isolated crops are sitting ducks for incoming pests, but on the right, you have a companion guild. The plants interlock their roots and overlap their natural defenses, creating a shared, robust shield. A garden is a living biological system. Forcing plants to survive entirely on their own makes gardening exhausting and high maintenance in the first place. You might be wondering if mapping out a complex, intertwined garden is actually worth the effort, especially when you factor in the overwhelming amount of conflicting advice online. Let's set a baseline reality check. Placing two plants next to each other won't fix poor watering habits. It won't revive dead soil, and it certainly cannot manufacture sunlight for a shaded bed. The required trade-off is shifting your investment of time. You have to stop reacting with chemical treatments mid-season and start proactively planning your spatial layout before a single seed touches the dirt. To get a high return on that planning time, you have to look past generic internet lists and identify which specific plant pairings solve the exact bottlenecks your garden is facing. The first strategy requires intentional sacrifice for the sake of pest control. We use what are known as trap crops. Take nasturtiums. Insects like aphids are so deeply drawn to these vibrant orange flowers that you will find them swarming the petals entirely, leaving your vulnerable green vegetables nearby completely untouched. They act as living decoys. Marigolds operate a bit differently. Instead of attracting bugs above ground, their root systems release specific chemical compounds that deter microscopic soil pests, like nematodes, from moving in. The catch is space. To make this strategy work, you must willingly dedicate 10 to 15% of your potential food-growing beds to plants that are destined to be heavily damaged. It requires a shift in how you view success, accepting planned damage to guarantee whole system protection. If you cannot afford to sacrifice space, your next option is interplanting mutually beneficial crops within the same bed to optimize your yield. Here is a cross-section of a shared garden bed, demonstrating above-ground synergy. The basil releases strong waves of scent that actually mask the tomato plant, hiding it from destructive pests like hornworms. Below the soil line, we see a different synergy between carrots and onions. Thick carrot taproots push deep, fracturing dense soil clumps. This creates clear pathways for shallow, fibrous onion roots to easily spread out. In return, onions release chemical scents, repelling carrot flies. The major risk here is spatial calculation. You must know the exact mature heights of everything you plant to ensure the larger canopy doesn't completely block sunlight from reaching the understory crops. Biological multipliers maximize your spatial efficiency, but they demand precise spacing knowledge to prevent accidental light starvation within the bed. For a system that heavily manages itself, we look to historical polycultures. The prime model is the indigenous Three Sisters method: corn, beans, and squash. Every plant has a rigid structural role. The tall cornstalk functions strictly as a living vertical trellis, with the climbing beans wrapping securely around it as they grow. Those beans pay their rent by pulling nitrogen from the air and fixing it directly into the soil to feed the system. At ground level, broad squash leaves act as a living mulch, retaining moisture and completely shading out weed growth. But the risk of failure here is high. If your planting schedules are mistimed and the beans go into the dirt too early, their aggressive climbing vines will pull immature cornstalks straight to the ground, ruining the system. Complex guilds offer the highest level of ecosystem autonomy, but getting there requires rigorous management, timing, and structural planning to avoid a tangled, unproductive mess. Sometimes, successful ecosystem architecture isn't about what you combine, it's about actively avoiding toxic combinations and managing structurally aggressive plants. This compatibility matrix shows the invisible dangers. Because tomatoes and potatoes are related species, planting them near each other turns their shared bed bright red with risk. They attract and share the exact same rapid-spreading diseases, like blight. And while onions are helpful to carrots, they are intensely antagonistic to beans. Onions will actively inhibit and stunt the growth of neighboring bean root systems, driving your yield down. Then you have dual-natured plants like mint. It is an exceptional pest deterrent, but it possesses a highly aggressive, creeping root system. The necessary trade-off for mint is sacrificing in-ground soil integration. You have to isolate it in heavy pots, strictly preventing it from creeping over and choking out your neighbor crops. Building a healthy ecosystem relies heavily on mapping rigid boundaries and enforcing physical separation of incompatible species. This chart evaluates our strategies by weighing the required effort against the overall garden impact. Simple biological multipliers like tomatoes and basil or protective marigolds plot cleanly in the top left. High impact, very low effort. If you are a beginner or short on time, stay on that top left quadrant and ignore complex polycultures completely. The Three Sisters Guild yields massive results, but it sits up in the top right, demanding heavy, timed effort. If you are an optimizer with ample space, invest in the Three Sisters and dedicated trap crops to minimize your chemical reliance. Just avoid the bottom right corner. Putting aggressive spreaders like mint directly in the ground is high effort for low reward. For the space-constrained container gardener, avoid space-heavy trap crops entirely. Instead, utilize potted mint and garlic to create a space-efficient aromatic barrier around your vegetables. Shifting away from isolated rows of dirt and toward interconnected partnerships is the highest leverage decision you can make.